a profoundly useful scientific tool at a fraction of the cost of a space research platform. Recent tests that utilized Holloman balloons included atmospheric sampling and gravity measurement experiments, high-altitude astronomic studies, weapon systems evaluations, and gamma-ray detection experiments. While most tests continue to be launched from the permanent balloon launch facility at Holloman Air Force Base, U.S. Air Force balloon crews have recently launched balloons from numerous field locations in the U.S., including 2 sites in Roswell, as well as Alaska, Panama, and Antarctica. Balloon payload recoveries. UFO theorists support their claim of an extraordinary occurrence in the New Mexico desert by describing mysterious U.S. military personnel operating a variety of vehicles and aircraft that always seem to arrive shortly after the crash of a flying saucer. When carefully scrutinized, the descriptions of the mystery crews, their equipment, methods, and the areas where the recoveries allegedly occurred in targeted high-altitude balloon recovery areas indicates that Holloman Balloon Branch activities were most likely responsible for the claims. To successfully recover high-altitude balloons, balloon recovery technicians regularly ventured far from Holloman Air Force Base. In most instances, the balloons and their scientific payloads were recovered from predetermined recovery areas. These regularly targeted areas located in Arizona, West Texas, and New Mexico included the area surrounding Roswell. From 1947 to the present, the Roswell area has been the site of hundreds of balloon payload recoveries, including those that carried anthropomorphic dummies. The regularly targeted areas were the result of the evolution of high-altitude balloon control techniques developed at Holloman Air Force Base. These techniques were based on meteorological, geographical, and operational conditions that exist in New Mexico. These factors, combined with ample amounts of skill and experience of balloon controllers at Holloman Air Force Base, determine the impact points of Holloman high-altitude balloons. Many of the procedures used to position Air Force balloons are described in General Philosophy and Techniques of Balloon Control and Meteorological Aspects of Constant Level Balloon Operations in Southwestern United States, both by Bernard D. Gildenberg, see statement in Appendix B. Gildenberg served as the Holloman Balloon Branch meteorologist, engineer, and physical science administrator from 1951 until 1981. During this period, Gildenberg, a recognized world expert in upper atmospheric wind patterns, pioneered methods to launch, control, track, and recover high-altitude balloons. Many of these methods are still used today by the U.S. Air Force and by research organizations throughout the world. Interaction with civilians. In several accounts, unsubstantiated allegations have been made that military personnel who retrieved equipment from rural areas of New Mexico intimidated and threatened civilians. Contrary to these charges, Balloon Branch personnel enjoyed good relations with the local community and often solicited their assistance in the area of a balloon or payload landing. In the flat, featureless desert areas of southeastern New Mexico near Roswell, the parachutes, payloads, the balloons themselves, and circling chase aircraft often drew crowds of curious onlookers from the local community. In fact, so many civilians were often present at described by longtime civilian Balloon Branch recovery supervisor Robert Blankenship as being like the circus come into town. Allegations that civilians were threatened or told to forget what they saw are profoundly inaccurate. Threats, intimidation, or other types of misconduct by Balloon Branch personnel would have served no purpose, since without the cooperation of local persons, many recoveries would not have been possible. Most balloon recoveries were coordinated in advance with local law enforcement agencies. If a balloon or payload landed on private property and the owner could not be located, Balloon Branch operating instructions dictated that the local sheriff or police must be contacted. In situations where local persons arrived at balloon landing sites before the recovery crews, they were simply asked to step back to allow the recovery personnel to secure the balloon equipment. If these persons inquired as to the purpose of a balloon flight, they were informed by technicians that it was a U.S. Air Force scientific study and were given a telephone number at Holloman Air Force Base if they required additional information. At Holloman Air Force Base, individuals qualified to answer detailed questions responded to these inquiries. There was never a reason to mislead or threaten individuals who observed balloon operations. Relations with local citizens were good, and balloon branch personnel and equipment were a common sight to residents in areas with high incidences of balloon operations. In a few instances, situations arose when persons not familiar with the procedures and equipment used by the balloon branch misunderstood their activities. Such misunderstandings occurred several times during the 1970s and 1980s, when recovery crews not only attracted the attention of local citizens while coordinating balloon recoveries, but also drew the attention of federal law enforcement agencies. Checks with the local sheriff revealed that the trucks and circling aircraft in the desert near Roswell were part of a balloon recovery mission and not a drug smuggling operation. Apparently, balloon recoveries appeared to be something suspicious even to federal agents. End of Section 3. Recording by Aaron Bennett. Section 4 of The Roswell Report, Case Closed by James McAndrew. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Aaron Bennett. The Roswell Report, Case Closed by James McAndrew. Comparison of witnesses' accounts to U.S. Air Force activities. Section 1.4. Comparison of witnesses' accounts to U.S. Air Force activities. Were they aliens or dummies? This question can be answered by comparing witness testimony and the Air Force projects of the 1950s, High Dive and Excelsior. Both of these projects employed anthropomorphic dummies flown by high-altitude balloons and appeared to satisfy the requirements of the previously established research profile. A. An activity that, if viewed from a distance, would appear unusual. B. An activity for which the exact date was not likely to have been known because many dummies were dropped over a 6-year period, 1953 to 1959. C. An activity that took place in many areas of rural New Mexico. D. An activity that involved a type of aerial vehicle with dummies that had 4 fingers, were bald, and wore one-piece gray suits. E. An activity that required recovery by numerous military personnel in an assortment of vehicles that included a wrecker, a 6x6, and a weapons carrier. The testimony used in the following comparison, an undocumented mixture of first-hand and second-hand recountings, are the actual statements, not the interpretations of UFO proponents, that are presented to prove the Earth was visited by extraterrestrial beings, and the U.S. Air Force has covered up this fact since 1947. This comparison is augmented by references to photographs whenever possible to illustrate the undeniable similarities between the descriptions provided by the witnesses and the equipment and methods employed by the U.S. Air Force projects. Crash Site 1, allegedly north of Roswell. This summarized account is the basis for the alleged flying saucer crash site north of Roswell. Footnote: in The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, Avon Books 1994, page 131, the authors provided a corroborating account for this testimony from a 96-year-old man who was in ill health, whose interview was not tape recorded and has since died. According to the book, the man's wife and daughter said that he was easily confused and memories of his life were jumbled and reordered. End of footnote. The exact location is not known since the witness, Mr. James Ragsdale, in 2 separate sworn statements has described 2 different sites, many miles apart. This account was excerpted from an interview with Mr. Ragsdale by author Donald Schmidt. A transcript of the complete interview is included in Appendix C. The account, James Ragsdale. They was using dummies in those damn things. Testimony attributed to Ragsdale, who is deceased, states that he and a friend were camping one evening and saw something fall from the sky. The next morning, when they went to investigate, they saw a crash site. One part of the craft was kind of buried in the ground, and one part of it was sticking out of the ground. I'm sure that there was bodies, either bodies or dummies. The federal government could have been doing something they didn't want anyone to know what this was. They was using dummies in those damn things. They could use remote control. But it was either dummies or bodies or something laying there. They looked like bodies. They were not very long. not over 4 or 5 foot long at the most. We didn't see their faces or nothing like that. We had just gotten to the site and the army and all was coming, and we got into a damn jeep and took off. This testimony then describes an assortment of military vehicles used to recover the bodies. It was 2 or 3 6x6 army trucks, a wrecker, and everything. Leading the pack was a 47 Ford car with guys in it. It was 6 or 8 big trucks besides the pickup, weapons carriers, and stuff like that. Ragsdale also said that before he left the area, he observed the military personnel gathering stuff up and they cleaned everything all up. Ragsdale made numerous references to equipment, vehicles, and procedures consistent with documented anthropomorphic dummy recoveries for projects High Dive and Excelsior. The repeated use of the term dummy and the witness's own admission that they was using dummies in those damn things, and I'm sure that was bodies, either bodies or dummies, leaves little doubt that what he described was an anthropomorphic dummy recovery. Based on testimony attributed to this witness, the confusion could have resulted from the fact that he observed these activities from a distance. If the witness was even a short distance from the odd-looking anthropomorphic dummies, it would be logical for him to believe, when interviewed 35 to 40 years after the event, that he thought they were dummies or bodies or something. Also, for some of the high-altitude drops, the dummies did not separate from the suspension rack and rode the rack to the ground without deployment of a parachute. If the parachutes of the dummies or parachutes of the rack assembly did not deploy, a common occurrence during the early dummy drops, then they free fell from up to 98,000 feet. As a result of these malfunctions, the arms and legs of the dummies were often separated from the body on impact. This may account for the witness's description of bodies not over 4 or 5 feet tall. Another portion of his testimony suggesting that the witness observed an Air Force high-altitude balloon in dummy recovery was the statement, "The federal government could have been doing something because they didn't want anyone to know what this was. They was using dummies in those damn things. They could use remote control. Balloon controllers use remote control to relay commands to the balloon control package to valve gas and drop ballast. The dummies themselves were also dropped from the suspension rack by remote control." The witness also described a balloon branch procedure that required the area of a balloon or payload landing to be restored to its original condition. It was evident in the statements they cleaned everything all up and they began gathering this stuff up. Thoroughly cleaning a balloon or dummy landing site and removing any debris deposited there was a standard procedure to maintain good community relations and avoid legal claims that could arise over property damages or livestock losses. Cattle were known to ingest scraps of polyethylene balloon material that sometimes littered entire fields following a balloon failure or flight termination. The military vehicles described were also consistent with recovery and communications vehicles used during the 1950s to retrieve anthropomorphic dummies and suspension racks. The witness stated he saw a wrecker, a 6x6, a weapons carrier, a 47 Ford car, and a pickup. The wrecker was most likely an M342 5-ton wrecker that was assigned to the balloon branch for launch and recovery operations. Other vehicles described were also the type used to launch and recover anthropomorphic dummies. The 6x6 is a likely reference to an M35 2.5-ton cargo truck. Weapons carriers were the common name of a Dodge M37 3/4-ton utility truck. References to the pickup and a 47 Ford car were likely descriptions of other civilian and military vehicles often present at high-altitude balloon launch and recovery locations. Crash Site 2, allegedly 175 miles northwest of Roswell. This purported flying saucer